Coogs House. All right, so the Houston Cougar baseball team has had an incredible run through the conference portion of the regular season, but can they win the whole darn conference in their last athletic events in the AAC and then do more?
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, the daily podcast all about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan or just a hater can't step by, please be sure to subscribe down below. That way we can listen to Cougs into your newsfeed each and every day. We appreciate you making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Welcome back to the YouTube channel. Remember, at 1,250 subscribers, we're giving away a hat that looks just like mine. Little Cougar paw on the front, Locked On the side, Nike drive head and all that. Brand new hat for someone at 1,250 because we're doing some sort of giveaway every 250 subscribers here at the start. So make sure to subscribe so we get there, and then like and comment down below to let us know that you are entered into the contest. If, after we talk all about baseball today, you're like, man, oh man, I'm just all baseballed out. I don't know what to comment down below this. Tell us what program you're looking forward to not having to play ever again in the American Athletic Conference as we move into the Big 12. So let's keep this thing moving. We are about to talk a lot of baseball with one Jeremy Branham. Now, Jeremy is a big-time voice in Houston, hosts the Killer Bees on 97.5 in the Houston area, talks about Houston baseball, talks about Houston Astros, all things Houston on 97.5. So we're excited to bring him in and talk a little bit of Cougar baseball. Without further ado, let's bring him on in. And we are joined by Jeremy Branham. You may recognize the voice around town on 97.5. But Jeremy, how are you doing today? We caught you in the airport. Where are you headed?
I'm headed to Clearwater, Florida, watch the American Conference Tournament. So if we get any of the PA, the intercom, we're slamming the door on your face as you miss your flight, I apologize in advance.
Gotcha. So you're heading to Tampa, Florida for, weirdly, I guess unless they move the Big 12 tournament, what might be the last time, right? Like, I don't know what else you're going to do in Tampa.
Yeah, I've thought about that. I love Clearwater. We've been going here for some time, so I've gotten a lay of the land. I know the good places to eat. The certain parts of the beaches that I like. So, yeah, it's bittersweet. It's sweet going to the Big 12, but it's bitter. I'm gonna have to vacation here now. They're not gonna pay for my flight and my room. I'm gonna have to go on my own dime, which is always a little bit more difficult.
A little bit more difficult, but I guess there's some fun Big 12 cities, right? I mean, like Manhattan, Kansas, or it's not quite.
The Little Apple?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of some more appealing to come up with.
I've been to Manhattan, Kansas. I've been there, actually. I've enjoyed my time in Manhattan as well. There's no beaches there, but there's fun to be had.
Fair enough. It's not quite the Big Apple, but the Little Apple. It's got stuff on. Can we talk about? I want to talk some about the conference tournament you're headed off to go see. But I want help putting in perspective for the listener that college baseball is not on television. We kind of be looking for certain things. How ridiculous is this Cougar baseball season right now? Because I got to be honest, the first time I talked about baseball about 10 weeks ago, they looked dead in the water.
I would say the pitching. They've came into the season expecting tons of offense, and I think we're starting to see that offense. Maybe a little bit slow out of the gate, but been more consistently once conference play began. But probably the pitching is the biggest reason for why you've seen the improvement. Coming into the year, roles weren't really defined yet, and it takes a little bit of time defining those roles. But the talented staff, and then they had tons of injuries. I mean, they got snake bit by multiple season enders for pitchers that were going to be big factors for this team. Kyle Calameta was your opening day Saturday starter. He made his first start, then left the game in his first inning of his second start, out for the year. Jose Torrealba came into the season. He was supposed to be your closer. I mean, that's pretty high leverage spot, as big a leverage spot as there is in the back end of the bullpen. Several other guys that we never really got to see their talent, never really got to see their skill. So the injuries were devastating early in the year. And now you're starting to see the coaching kind of come into play with that pitching staff, carving out a role for Josh Eknes, being kind of the Friday night guy. And you've seen the development, having a career year. Kate Satelli, another guy who is transfer, has a very talented arm, hasn't always put it together. He's put together some solid starts. Even if you go back and you look at Paul Schmitz, who's the big freshman from Germany, he's looking like a really solid piece. And then you lost him at the start of conference play, actually started the regular season finale. So maybe he can give you something a little bit in the Clearwater as well. So snake bitten with injuries early, hard to define the roles because you didn't really know who you had yet. And now you're starting to see that, Kyle Bunn and what he brings to that pitching staff starting to come into fruition.
You mentioned the exciting bats they've had on display all year and that they kind of knew that was the case coming into the season. Obviously, we're going to talk extensively, I assume, at some point about Justin Murray and how crazy a year he had in his first year in the American Athletic Conference. But you have Chulamero, Zach Arnold, it seems like a collection, a by committee kind of thing. Am I wrong there?
No, I think it's a kind of a sum of all its parts. I mean, you have your better offensive players. You mentioned a few of them with Justin Murray, and you have Zach Arnold, and those guys are legitimate, all conference selections. I was looking at the news today, and 2 all conference guys. I know a lot of people felt that Justin Murray got snubbed a little bit for the conference player of the year, which I'll hear that argument. I would say definitely, kind of a committee approach. I would go one step further and say it's an offense that doesn't really have tons of holes, right? Drew Bianco is currently batting 9th on this team, and he was your opening day leadoff guy. So you have guys throughout the entire lineup that are factors, and you can even go to the bench and look at factors. I mean, I think that this team has 4 starting outfielders. They only play 3. So Whitting kind of goes with the handedness game, lefty versus righty, righty versus lefty, who has the hot hand. Thomas Lissy has emerged late in the season. We've seen him make a few starts, hit a big home run against UCF in the series finale. That was the go-ahead run scored off of that weird 8th inning travel curfew game. Brandon Burkell's been a steady force, leads the league in stolen bases. Then Ian McMillan, the captain, they call him the Admiral. He's a steady force there in the bottom of the lineup. So it's a lineup that is kind of relentless because there's not an easy line. There's not an easy spot. There's not a pocket that you can attack. You look at a lot of really good offenses that 7, 8, 9 maybe it's not very good. You can attack the bottom of the order, but this lineup's good from top to bottom.
So we've danced around Justin Murray, and again, I do think that there's more than just him on this order. And you mentioned that top to bottom, it's a pretty good batting lineup. But Murray is leading the team in average. He's, what do I have him down here, as second or third on the team in home runs. And he also has the second best ERA on the team. He was pitcher of the week last week and also just won. And so it felt like the same week, but he just won newcomer of the year in the conference award.
Yeah.
Put into perspective, what does that season look like for Justin in his first year in Houston?
It's wild, honestly. I don't think that they had tons of plans for him to pitch, especially in the high leverage, situations that he's kind of earned. He's earned these positions. I've talked to some people that said he didn't have a great fall on the mound, and there were some thoughts that he might kind of be a middle reliever, kind of a mop-up guy on the mound, and he's kind of earned this spot. And the Cougars were in need to find some back-end leverage guys because of some key injuries. Jose Torrealba, chief among them. And it's been fun watching him. I mean, he comes in late in games, every high leverage game that you're in, 7, 8, 9 inning. Justin Murray is going to be called upon. It's interesting. He leads the team in saves, one of the leaders in saves. He also leads the team in wins. So it shows you go to him in a tie game in the 7th, tie game in the 8th. Not necessarily your prototypical save situations. And then offensively, I mean, he's been fantastic. I mean, he and Zach Arnold, they kind of take their turns on which of the two are the better offensive players. And then you have Anthony Tullamero, who you can throw into the mix there at times. But it's a lot of fun watching him. He's a little different than Shohei because Shohei's a two-way player that starts, right? Like Wichita State has a guy named Peyton Tolley who DHs for them. And then he's their Saturday starter, I believe. At least he was whenever we played him. So it's, he's a two-way guy that starts games and then he bats in the middle of their lineup. But not too often do you see it with the guy being a back end of the, bullpen guy. So it's always funny when Kyle Bunn will come to the mound and make the pitching change. And it's Justin Murray when he's coming in because Bunn will have the pitching glove in his hand. So you see Bunn leave the dugout with the pitching glove, Justin Murray's pitching glove in his hand. He's tosses it to him. They trade out the first base mitt. So it's an interesting dynamic. But I mean, he's a heck of a player. I know that Brock Rodden won the Player of the Year, and He's a really good player too. But if I had a vote, and they don't allow me to vote because I'm a homer, but I would have picked Justin Murray.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned it feels exactly like Shohei. I mean, like he has the same kind of dominance on the Houston roster anyway. Like, obviously there's a difference in a starter and a DH and all that kind of, but like he feels like he has just the same kind of impact. I've been amazed watching this year. I hadn't really seen a whole lot like it where he does so many different things at the college level. I do want to talk for a second, though, as we jump into the second segment, talk some about this conference tournament that you're off to see. All right, so it is officially time to make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs because right now new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 and $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Now, I'm telling you, and this may be because our Houston Rockets are obviously out of the playoffs, never in the playoffs, I should say. But I've really, really enjoyed watching Tom Ball's own Jimmy Butler and the Miami Heat. For Tuesday night's game, they have the Heat favored by just 1.5 points and the over-under set at 216. Here's what I'm thinking. I'm taking the Heat, but I'm thinking after watching how Boston kind of quit on Missoula and the whole situation in Game 3, that actually may be under 216 in a Heat victory. But I am taking the Heat. I'm taking them at even the 1.5, and I am also taking the under 216. I'm telling you to do it at FanDuel because there's no better place to bet all playoff action and America's #1 sports book. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Wichita State has a guy that does both pitch and bat. And Wichita State's kind of a sore subject because before we get into the seeding of the tournament and preview Tulane and stuff like that, you're chuckling. That game got canceled to end that series. Houston won both of the first two, so I think it stands to reason that they would have won the third, right? But it got canceled, and Houston comes in second in the conference by a half game. Am I jumping to conclusions to assume that they kind of got screwed there?
I think you'd be jumping to conclusions if you were to guarantee a victory in that game, but I don't think you'd be jumping to conclusions to say that they got screwed. Play that game would have been difficult, so it's kind of one of those things where it's more of a really bad luck maybe than anybody like screwing you or any bad decision or anything like that. It was just very unlucky. I was pretty upset about it, I'll be completely honest, like right when it happened, because the implications of it were pretty dramatic in the sense that even like the way that I've been saying it is that the Cougars lost the opportunity to win the championship because there's no guarantee you're going to win that game. In baseball, you know how it is. Wichita State's a really good team with some really good pitching and some really good hitting. So there's no guarantee you're going to win the game. But they lost an opportunity to win a game that would have won them a conference championship. So it's a huge gut punch. And the frustrating part about it is even if you would have lost that game against Wichita State in the series finale, it wouldn't have changed the scenarios and the implications of what needed to happen down the stretch because you had the tiebreaker on East Carolina. So the tiebreaker is already worth a half a game. So that you had a half a game on East Carolina and then you had the tiebreaker. It wouldn't have mattered had you lost that series finale against Wichita State. You would have been tied with Wichita State or with East Carolina if you lost. East Carolina would have to finish with a 1 game better record than you down the stretch. I think there were 6 games left. But if you would have won the game, now East Carolina has to jump you 2 games. So there was no downside of losing. The downside of not playing and then not winning cost you potentially 2 games. And I had a bad feeling as soon as it happened that Houston was going to lose the conference by a half game because I just knew the scenario. I knew the implications and the ramifications of what had happened. And right whenever they decided to cancel the game, I was like, if we lose this league by half a game, and turns out that was the case.
It's exactly. And frankly, I don't mean to diminish the run East Carolina went on to end the year by any stretch, but it just kind of felt like Houston has had this year. I mean, the first time they've won every conference series in the American, right? I mean, it was kind of this fortuitous year where all that is missing is that regular season conference championship. And that half game ends up being such a big, important thing. Can we talk some about Tulane? Tulane is we get Tulane on Tuesday. You're on your way there. First pitch is at 3:00 Central Time. Am I correct there? I think it's 3:00. Maybe is it 3:00 Eastern? I got it backwards. But
it's 3 Central. It's 3 Central, but
3 Central
tournament baseball. I'd be stunned if it started at 3 Central.
Oh yeah, because it's got to be what is it? There's 2 games before it, probably on this. I'd assume on the same field there in Florida. Regardless, they play in Tulane, and that takes me to a fun 3-game series that Houston, I guess, did win all 3 games, but like they were exciting games, right?
Yeah, they were tight. Tulane's got some top end pitching. If you look at their 1-2 punch at the top of the rotation, and Houston had really good success against their Friday guy, Dylan Carmouche, but Dylan Carmouche has been nails all year long. And then you look at Castro, who's their Saturday starter. It'll be interesting to see who Tulane decides to throw tomorrow. That would be pretty fascinating. He had some good success against Houston. Cougars touched him up a little bit, but had a solid start. Went, I think, 6 innings, and then Houston was able to get to the bullpen. So Tulane's formidable, especially whenever they have one of those 2 guys on the mound. They're like, it's baseball. Anybody can beat anybody. But if you have a Dylan Carmouche on the mound, if you have a Castro on the mound, certainly capable of beating anybody in this league. This league's been pretty even from top to bottom. And they have some guys at the top of their lineup, maybe 1 through 5, 1 through 6 that can beat you, that are dangerous. So, it's a 7 seeds. People look at the seed line a lot of times. Oh, it's guaranteed victory. One, it's baseball. Anything can happen. And Tulane's a pretty live 7, especially with the pitching that they have at the top. It'd be better to get them later in the tournament after they burn those 2 guys. But at the start of the tournament, they'll be tough.
Well, it's funny you pull up. So I pull up the box scores to make sure I'm got my stats right as we talk through it. That 3rd game was 17-11, and like a comeback 17 runs at that. Like that was an exciting Sunday of the series, and the saving that was Justin Murray for whatever it's worth. Yeah. What a fun! I hope we have something fun that goes our way. I guess I should say on Tuesday like that. Operating as if they win, they then have either Wichita State or Memphis in the 2nd game. I say operating as if they win. I guess technically if they lose, they're not out. Right? It's a double elimination deal. So it's not the end of the world if they do face a great pitcher like you're mentioning and have a rough day from the plate. But Wichita State kind of takes us back to that same series. So they won 2 games and got rained out. Memphis, they beat twice. There's some like rivalry across all athletics of Memphis. That'd be fun to kind of rub one in their face on the way out. What do you see in projecting across the rest of the tournament, though? How realistic would Houston winning this thing be?
Well, I think it's in play. You were talking about how they've won every conference series that they've had all year. First time that Houston Cougar baseball has won every conference series that they played in a season. 77th year of Houston Cougar baseball history, and they did something this year that they've never done before. So I think it's in play. There's certain paths that probably make it easier than others. We talked about all the injuries with the pitching staff. Last year, Houston won their first 2 games, and then UCF came out of the losers bracket and won that game 6, forcing game 7. Now, Houston ended up winning that game 7 and went to the conference championship game. But, maybe losing that game 6 cost you some pitching, in the conference championship game. So some paths are easier than other paths, obviously, especially in a tournament. Wichita State I love Wichita State's roster. Now, the Cougars have had success against them, and they've hit some guys that haven't really been hit around the league. But Houston went in. I guess they played 5 times, so they won 4 or 5. The only loss was the middle game up at their place. They have 3 guys at the top of their rotation that can go. They have a reliever or 2 that can go, and their lineup is dangerous. They have Chuck Ingram, who ended up winning the batting title in the league. Is there like a kind of not prototypical leadoff guy, tons of power. Brock Rodden won the conference player of the year, and that guy is one of the best second basemen in all of college baseball. I love his game. So Wichita State's really good. And then Memphis, they're scrappy. They're under a first-year head coach. You know how first years can go, where you kind of get maybe some players decided to leave, maybe some players you're bringing in from lower levels, but they're scrappy. They like to run a lot. They try to put pressure on your pitching staff. And then they have, the name's escaping me at the moment, and I'm curious to see when they use him, because they actually pitched him on Friday. So he'd probably be on short rest if he went tomorrow. But they have maybe the most talented starting pitcher in the league. Probably going to be the highest draft pick in the league, Memphis does. So if you can escape him, you avoid him, you like your chances a little bit better. And then they have one of the better closers in the league too. So, both Memphis and Wichita State present their challenges. I don't think you worry about anybody else on the other side of the bracket. It's kind of one of those, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Because if you're playing in a championship game, it's like, okay, we'll worry about that when we worry about that.
Right.
Tulane's going to Tulane throws one of their top two guys. They're going to be tough. And, I love Wichita State's roster, and Memphis, again, that starter is probably the best talent in the entire American Conference.
Well, and I think the interesting thing is that, I think just if I looked just at box scores, I'd feel pretty good about Houston's side. But when you go back and check the tape, for those are very talented baseball teams on this side. That 1 versus 2 seed, that half game we keep talking, that ended up being really important here. The other side looks a little bit different, doesn't it?
Yeah, I've been saying this for maybe 3 series into the league, that I kind of felt that the top 3 were the top 3. East Carolina, Wichita State, and Houston. I feel like those are the best 3 teams in the league, and I don't think it's much of a drop off to the rest of the league. I think you could put 4 through 8 kind of all in the same tier. I think you can put 1 through 3 in the same tier. I don't think there's much of a drop off from that top tier to the bottom tier at all, especially given specific days. Memphis with their ace on the mound might be in that top tier.
Right.
It's just Cincinnati, when their bats are hitting, might be in that top tier. So I don't think there's a huge drop off there. But if you, agree with that notion that East Wichita State are the top 3, and they finished top 3, and they were really the only 3 teams that were in the conference race, 3 weekends left in the season. You wanted to be the 1 seed so you could avoid the other 2, right? Because if you're East Carolina now, East Carolina is in a bracket with 3 teams that we're thinking aren't quite in that top tier. So the 1 seed was an advantage this year, I think maybe even more than others, because I think it's a 3-team league, depending on the day. But, the East Carolina gets to be kind of, by themselves, and then again, Cincinnati, UCF, USF, on paper at least. And of course, baseball is baseball, not played on paper. On paper, at least, I think that the 1 has a little bit more of a clearer advantage than most years.
Definitely. And so let's talk about the ECU matchup that would potentially happen, although I do think Houston's got a tough road. And then I want to ask you some about what comes afterwards, because I think if you were to ask me in early March, well, anyway, let's do one thing at a time. East Carolina, potential final matchup. Obviously, the first round went Houston's way and kind of started this crazy run through the American. That's been weeks ago at this point. Both teams looked different. What would you remind a casual observer about that matchup 10 weeks ago at this point?
Yeah, that was the first conference series of the year. So it's been that long ago. That was the last opponent that you faced in the league, because it was the first one. I can't remember how many games I did in that series, but basketball was still going on. I think they were eliminated the weekend before, and then I had an obligation, so I missed the Friday game, but did Saturday, Sunday. East Carolina is probably the bell cow of the league for the last 3-4 years. I think they've won the last 4 conference titles, 23, 22, 21, didn't play in 20 because of COVID, and then 19. So they've won 4 straight regular season titles, not 4 straight years. People like to nitpick that. 4 straight seasons that they've won the American. So they're the bell cow of the league. They're the only team that's going into Clearwater knowing that they're going to be playing next week. Everybody else in the American has to win this week. If they don't, they're not making a regional. East Carolina is always really good. They always have a lineup that has a couple of pros. They're always a kind of a dynamic lineup too, where they can play the lefty righty game a little bit too. Their Coach Godwin, he likes to mix and match a bit, but they're always formidable offensively, always really good offensively. Play to their park a lot. You look at their home and road record; it's a little bit different. And then, they always get good starting pitching. Last year was kind of an anomaly there. They used openers a lot, but this year they kind of gotten back to a truer rotation, and they're always really good in the bullpen. They don't blow many leads. So, yeah, they're a tough team. I mean, they're the best team in the league on paper. So
I think that I know the answer here, but it looks like just because the American is not the same prestigious conference that we'll be in next year, right? Houston probably has to win this thing to keep playing into June, it looks like. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I'd probably go a step further and say that it's a guarantee. That people might not want to hear that, but I think if you're being realistic about it, you have an RPI. I haven't been paying attention to the RPI because it's kind of been an afterthought for a while. I think the last time I looked, it was in the mid-90s. I think it's still around there. If I'm guessing right, it's still probably around the mid-90s. So, teams don't get into the tournament with mid-90 RPIs. They just don't. Houston, you don't expect the American Conference to to be as down in the RPI as they normally are. Usually it's a top 5, top 6 conference. This year, I think they were kind of alternating between 9th and 10th, in the country. So that makes it tough. I think East Carolina is the only lock. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty confident saying that because the other teams around the league just don't have the RPI necessary to be a regional team. So East Carolina wins the tournament. It's more than likely a 1-bid conference. And if anybody else wins it, then it'll be a 2-bid because, East Carolina is going to be in a regional for sure.
And that was going to be my question was, if Houston wins, East Carolina still makes this thing, right? And that's because they're not, on top of the fact that they swept a couple of series on the stretch here, their non-conference schedule was strong and impressive, and they won a lot of those games. Houston was dealing with those injuries we talked about at the Open, right? That kind of set them back a little bit. So Houston's got to win this week to keep playing, and that kind of makes it fun, right? That makes it fun. You're going to be covering it on the ground. Where can people find you and listen to you talk it through? And because you're covering the whole thing.
Yeah, I'll be on the call of every game. I would encourage everybody to go to the Varsity Network app, really for all of our coverage that we produce. Football games air on the Varsity Network app. The basketball games, men's and women's, airs on the Varsity Network app. All the baseball games are on the Varsity Network app. I think most people, sometimes not really aware of the Varsity Network app. My fault. I don't do a great job of, I guess, marketing that as well as I should. But for football and basketball, we're on terrestrial radio at 9:50 a.m. But if you're not local, if you're not within the the satellite signal, if it's a baseball game you're looking to listen to, if it's a women's basketball game you want to listen to, I highly encourage the Varsity Network app. You can go in there and you can plug in your favorite team. I think you can set up notifications and remind you of when games are going on the air. Real easy nowadays. We live, as kind of this podcast era where we just, pull up what we want to listen to. We plug it in our CarPlay. Follow along with some process.
That's the Varsity Network app. I recommend downloading it if you are listening to Cougar things outside of like the big marquee names, obviously. That is Jeremy Branham of 97.5 ESPN Radio in Houston, covers the Cougs across a number of different stations and outlets. Thank you for coming on again today, Jeremy. It's been fun talking Cougar baseball. We're going to cheer him on all week because it sounds like we've got to go Cougs. Go Cougs. All right, that's all we've got today. Thank you again to Jeremy for coming on the show, talking a little bit about the Cougar baseball program. Again, we don't spend a whole lot of time, occasional segments here and there, talking about the Cougar baseball program, but they had a heck of a season and are embarking onto the final postseason as a representative of the American Athletic Conference that Houston will ever have. So it's exciting news and kind of nostalgic news in a weird way. So thanks to Jeremy for guiding us through that. Thank you all so much for tuning in, listening to Locked On Cougs and making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. If you're looking for a second listen of the day, I'm going to recommend go to Locked On Astros. They're talking about Corey Julks and all kinds of other things in the pro side of Houston baseball as well. So make sure you go check them out. They have a fun time over there as well. Also, current teacher over there. So go check them out for your second listen today. Locked On Cougs is a proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Cougs.